Every year, a website ranks the world's militaries from strongest to weakest, and every year, millions of people take that list at face value. The 2026 edition covers 145 countries, weighs more than 60 separate factors, and produces a single number for each nation. It is the most widely cited military ranking on Earth. It is also measuring the wrong thing. Not because the math is dishonest, because the math counts what is parked, and wars are decided by what can be replaced. 5 of the armies ranked high on that list have a problem the index cannot see. 3 of the countries it undersells have an advantage it does not know how to count. The index is Global Firepower, and its 2026 edition was published on January 23rd of this year. It builds what it calls the Power Index, a single score where the lower the number, the stronger the conventional military. It pulls from more than 60 individual factors sorted into categories: the raw count of military units, financial position, logistical capability, and geography, with internal bonuses and penalties applied by formula. Nuclear weapons are deliberately left out. The index measures conventional warfighting potential and nothing else. The problem is not that Global Firepower is lying. The site openly states that its formula is built to let smaller, technologically advanced nations compete with larger powers. The problem is what happens when a formula built on inventory meets a war built on attrition. Vox Ukraine documented the gap. The index does not explain where its numbers originate, and it does not explain why they swing between editions. Russia's tank inventory fell by more than half from one edition to the next, with no published justification. Compare that to counts anyone can check. Warspotting, working from visually confirmed evidence, logged 1,132 Russian tanks lost in 2024 alone. Oryx logged 3,688 destroyed since the start of the invasion through January 1, 2025. The Royal United Services Institute assessed in February 2024 that the Russian grouping in Ukraine had 2,060 tanks combat ready. Those are 3 different methods reaching 3 different numbers, and every one of them is traceable. The index is not. And then there is the sentence that should have ended the argument in 2022. In February of that year, Global Firepower ranked Russia second in the world. It ranked Ukraine 22nd. So if the ranking does not predict the outcome, what does? The answer is the least glamorous category in military affairs, and the United States is the proof of concept. The US Air Force operates 52 C-5M Super Galaxy transports, and it is the only operator of the type on the planet. It holds 222 C-17 Globemaster IIIs, of which roughly 200 are estimated operational. Boeing states that the C-17 flies more than 6,200 nautical miles empty and has virtually unlimited range with aerial refueling. That is a manufacturer's figure, and it should be read as one. But the number underneath it is not in dispute. The US Air Force operates approximately 75% of the world's aerial refueling fleet, depending on how you count inclusion. That is the ruler. Not how much a country owns, but how far it can move what it owns, and how fast it can replace what it loses. Measured that way, the list changes shape. Start with the least surprising case and work upward. North Korea sits at 31 out of 145 with a Pura index of 0.5933, and its trend is rising. On paper, that is a top quarter military. In the air, it is something else entirely. The Defense Intelligence Agency assesses that North Korean pilots fly roughly 15 to 20 hours per year, with fuel shortage as the significant limiting factor. Jane's reaches a similar figure, 15 to 25 hours annually, constrained by aviation fuel scarcity. Hold that number against the neighbors. Open source estimates put South Korean pilots at around 135 hours a year and US Air Force pilots above 180. A North Korean fighter pilot logs in a year what an American logs in 5 weeks. The DIA's own conclusion is blunt. It rates North Korean Air Force capability as marginal, with limited ability to project power beyond its own borders. The aerospace sector there builds only light single-engine aircraft and depends on cannibalizing existing airframes and buying parts abroad. And the public counts of how many of its combat aircraft actually fly scatter between 400 and over 1,100, with no figure traceable to an official document. That uncertainty is itself the finding. An air force whose operational strength cannot be established, flying 20 hours a year, is ranked 31st in the world. If this is useful so far, a quick like genuinely helps the channel. Egypt sits at 19, with a PDUR index of 0, 3651, and its inventory is genuinely large. 438,500 active personnel, 479,000 reservists, 300,000 paramilitary, 3,620 tanks, 1,088 military aircraft, and 149 naval vessels. Every one of those numbers is real, and every one of them is exactly the kind of number the index counts well. What the index cannot count is whether those pieces talk to each other. Justin Bronk, Senior Research Fellow for Air Power and Technology at RUSI, put it directly. Egypt has had significant difficulties integrating its Russian-supplied MiG-29 and Su-35 aircraft into its largely Western-supplied networks and command and control systems. An analysis cited by the same outlet, unnamed, so take it as attribution rather than authority, suggests Egypt's Russian fighters tend to become an air force within an air force. The contrast is procedural rather than technical. Rafales and F-16s follow NATO STANIG standards, so from a weapons standpoint, they integrate with far less friction. Egypt has been building a domestic command and control system, RISC-2, specifically to bridge its Western and Eastern platforms. That comes from open-source reporting rather than an official program document. And a point of honesty is required here, because it cuts against the easy version of this argument. The 2026 index places Egypt at 19, behind Israel at 15 and Iran at 16. This is not a case of an index inflating a country's position. It is a case of a large inventory whose sheer variety charges a price in sustainment, a price no ranking has a column for. Pakistan sits at 14, with a pure index of 0.2626, and its trend is falling. The trend line is the story. In 2024, Pakistani military spending declined for the third consecutive year, down to $10.2 billion, a real terms fall of 5.1% against 2023, according to SIPRI. That is not a country neglecting defense. Between 2015 and 2024, Pakistan directed an average of 17% of public spending to defense, the second highest ratio in the Indo-Pacific, against India's 8.6%. That is the brutal arithmetic of the case. Pakistan prioritizes defense more heavily than almost anyone in its region, and its defense budget still shrinks in real terms. A country can be committed and still be running out of room. Former Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa acknowledged publicly that the country lacks both the ammunition and the economic strength to sustain a prolonged conflict with India. There is a further claim in circulation that Pakistani ammunition reserves would support only 96 hours of high-intensity combat. That figure comes from Indian reporting citing anonymous intelligence sources published in May 2025 during an active crisis between the two countries. It is an interested source at an interested moment, and it should be treated as an unconfirmed allegation, not a fact. The SIPRI numbers do not need its help. India sits at 4 out of 145, Prinex 0.1346, fourth in the world, and its air force is short of squadrons in a way it has not been in living memory. The International Institute for Strategic Studies assessed in February 2026 that the Indian Air Force fields 29 fighter and ground attack squadrons. The authorized strength remains fixed at 42, the number India's own planners consider the minimum for two-front deterrence. The shortfall is the largest in decades, and it sits below the levels India maintained in 1965. For anyone who watched the Cold War arms balance in South Asia, the drop has a shape. The Indian Air Force peaked at 39.5 squadrons in the mid-1980s. It has been sliding ever since. The immediate cause is retirement outpacing replacement. The last MiG-21 Bison Squadron, number 23, the Panthers, stood down on September 26, 2025, the end of a type that had flown for India since the Cold War. But the deeper cause is the acquisition cycle itself. Dassault was selected in 2012 for the MMRCA program covering 126 aircraft. Pricing disputes shelved the purchase in 2014. India eventually ordered 36 Rafales in 2016, and they entered service in 2020. 14 years, from selection to a fleet less than a third the size of the original requirement. The constraint was never money. It was the ability to close a cycle, which brings this to the country the index ranks third, and to the single comparison that defines the entire category. China sits at 3, with a Prindex of 0.0919. The People's Liberation Army Air Force operates roughly 35 aerial tankers, a mix of Russian Il-78s, converted H-6 bombers, and YY-20As, based on the Y-20 airframe. The US Air Force operates more than 550. That ratio is the whole argument in one line. Not fighters, not hulls, not headcount. The aircraft that decide how far the fighters and the hulls can actually go. China is closing it. Analysts project the Chinese tanker fleet reaching around 100 aircraft by 2035, and that is a projection rather than a measurement. The trajectory is real, but a 15-year projection is not a capability. The American assessment is unusually specific about why this matters. National Defense University's Strategic Forum places the PLA as a still largely regional force, citing the absence of a global combatant command system, limited strategic airlift and sea lift, and the lack of a dense network of major overseas bases anchored in formal military alliances. The base at Djibouti is described as an initial overseas facility, with others potentially to follow. And the counter-argument deserves its space, because the regional force label is aging. The China Maritime Studies Institute finds that since 2023, the PLA has established an annual rhythm of embarking Army combat units on Navy amphibious ships for international exercises, and argues that China's projection ceiling is not capped by the size of its Marine Corps. The capacity is growing, and it is growing along exactly the axis the index does not weigh. That is the pattern in all five. North Korea, flight hours. Egypt, logistical integration. Pakistan, the economics of sustainment. India, the replacement cycle. China, logistical reach. Different countries, different decades, the same missing column. Now invert the ruler, and two countries change position immediately. South Korea sits at 5, and that ranking is not wrong. South Korea is not underrated by its position. It is underrated by what its position does not measure. The ability to build replacements faster than a war can destroy them. At Hanwha's Plant 3 in Changwon, Lee Kyung-hun, Senior Vice President of the Production Department, describes a K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzer taking 3 weeks to build. The plant doubled its capacity to 160 K-9s per year with a second assembly line, and targets 240 a year once a third line comes online. A representative from Hyundai Rotem frames the tank side in comparison, and this is a competitor describing his own product against a rival's, so the framing is interested. By that account, the German Leopard 2 costs 16 to 20 billion won per unit and takes more than 5 years to produce 50 vehicles, while the K2 costs 8 to 10 billion and delivers 180 in 3 years. The verifiable number sits underneath the sales pitch. Hyundai Rotem delivered the first 10 K2s to Poland 3 months after the contract was signed. Around 78% of components used in Korean defense products are locally sourced, according to industry data. But the ceiling is real, and ignoring it would turn this into an advertisement. CSIS assesses that South Korea produces roughly 200,000 155mm artillery shells per year, a volume Ukrainian forces, an army of comparable size, fire in a single month of heavy combat. CSIS further notes that public reporting suggests South Korea could face an ammunition shortage within a week of a conventional conflict with the North. The argument is industrial replacement capacity. It is not an infinite magazine. And then there is Poland. At 21 out of 145, PW index 0.3891, behind Egypt at 19 and behind Ukraine at 20. On August 1st, 2025, Poland signed a $7 billion contract for another 180 K2 tanks from Hyundai Rotem, the single largest armor purchase in Polish history. When that order completes, Poland will field roughly 1,100 tanks. Germany, France, the United Kingdom and Italy have 950 between them. One country on NATO's eastern flank, ranked below Egypt, will operate more tanks than the 4 largest militaries of Western Europe combined. Germany's own figure is 313 Leopard 2s as of April 2026, 104 in the 2A7V configuration, 209 in 2A5 and 2A6. Poland's projected 2030 composition is more than 950 modern tanks, 360 K2s, 366 American Abrams, 235 German Leopards, and 150 Polish-built PT-91 Twardies. As of early 2026, 117 M1A2 SEPV3s have been delivered. Poland is also NATO's heaviest relative spender, with the 2026 budget proposal raising defense outlays to roughly 4.8% of GDP. And the part that separates buying from building, 61 of the 180 tanks in that last contract will be produced domestically at the Bumar-Łabędy plant, according to Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. Poland did not just purchase an army, It purchased the ability to keep producing one. The third country the index undersells is the one it ranks at 22 in February 2022, Ukraine. Not as a prediction, but as a settled result. A military the index placed 20 places below its opponent has now spent years absorbing the losses that Warspotting and Oryx spent years counting. Whatever the ranking measured in early 2022, it was not the thing that decided the following 4 years. Two rulers, then, laid against the same countries. The first counts what is parked on the ramp in the motor pool on the pier. It produces a clean number, and it is genuinely useful for what it measures. The second counts what can be moved, integrated, refueled, and rebuilt, and it produces no number at all, because nobody has found a way to reduce sustainment to a decimal. Global firepower is not blind to this. Its formula does include logistical capability, and it applies modifiers precisely so smaller advanced nations can compete. The criticism is about weight and transparency, not absence. And by its own declaration, the index excludes nuclear weapons entirely, which means the most consequential military capability on Earth appears nowhere in the ranking that most people quote. An index counts an army on the day the war starts. A war is decided by what that army looks like 6 months later.